So Colossians 1 verse 21 to 23 says, "Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant." Now, just for a bit of context, if we go back to the previous verses, it talks about Christ being supreme. It talks about his greatness. It talks about the fact that he existed before anything. He created everything ever thought of. He created everything on heaven and on earth, and everything was created through him and for him. So that was kind of the theme leading up to these verses. So it's Paul's continuing on and pushing his case as to why God is so good and why we need to follow him. So what Paul does is he has a bit of contrast. He starts off with, "At one time, once you were alienated from God, and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior." So we've got to remember that this is by our own doing, not by God's doing. He doesn't alienate us, we alienate him through our choices, through our actions. And the vast majority of time, this is because of our sin. We choose, despite God's freedom, for our choices. We still choose to do the wrong thing. We choose to sin. We choose to go against God's will. And because of that, that is, in a sense, what causes us to be alienated from God. But the thing is, God always welcomes us back into his arms, no matter what the situation is, no matter where we are, no matter what the sin is, or how much sin we have done, or what we have done. God forgives us, and he takes us back in with open arms. And so we've got to remember that it is us that is alienating ourselves from God, rather than him alienating us from him, because he is always there for us. He is always ready to accept us. What I find interesting as well is that he says we were enemies in our own minds. Now, sometimes I think about when we sin, we have this feeling of not being good enough. We have this feeling that we have failed, that we are rubbish, we're not good enough, we're sinful people, we're terrible people. Why do we deserve to have God's love? Whereas, in fact, it's going to explain it a little bit more in the next couple of verses, but in fact, none of that matters. That's not God speaking. That is us, our sin nature speaking. The devil, he wants us to feel that way. He wants us to feel alienated from God. So he's going to play at our minds when we do the wrong thing and try and tell us that we're terrible, that we don't deserve God's love. Whereas God is, like I said, he's always open. He's always there to accept us, no matter what situation or sin we have fallen into. So it starts off sounding like there's a bit of bad news that we've been alienated from God. But then there's a big but. So, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So there's a contrast. Before we were alienated from God, but now through Christ's death and his sacrifice, we are no longer alienated. We are holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. And the only condition of that is if we stay faithful, if we decide to choose to follow Jesus and believe in him with our hearts. So if we continue in our faith, established and firm, do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. So we need to stay firm. We need to not give up during challenging times. One thing I thought of is that we need to strengthen ourselves and prepare for future battles by equipping ourselves with his wisdom. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me give an example. A soldier does not train for a big battle by just lazing about, not doing anything to prepare, watching TV. I know soldiers back in that day didn't have TV, but let's say for our sake, they're watching TV on their phones, Googling how to cook sausages or something, and they do that for 3 weeks straight in the lead up for a big fight. No, they don't do that. They prepare for the challenge by training, by working hard, by working at and preparing themselves mentally and physically for the challenge ahead. And that's what we need to do as well as Christians. We are going to face lots of challenges. We're going to face lots of battles. And how do we expect to be able to fight those battles if we don't prepare ourselves? If we don't strengthen ourselves by spending time in God's Word, by spending time developing our relationship with Him, and giving ourselves lots of tools, lots of weapons to defend ourselves from all of the temptations of sin. So just to round off, the overall message I'll give you from this is to not give up hope. Throughout our challenges, do not give up hope. We have the God who created everything on our side. We can draw on His strength when we can't fight with only our own strength.